What you are seeing and hearing right now is nothing but a dream. You are dreaming right now in this moment. You are dreaming with the brain awake. Dreaming is the main function of the mind, and the mind dreams 24 hours a day. It dreams when the brain is awake, and it also dreams when the brain is asleep. The difference is that when the brain is awake, there is a material frame that makes us perceive things in a linear way. When we go to sleep, we do not have that frame, and the dream has the tendency to change constantly.
Do you believe in repenting? What if the kingdom of heaven's within you? Do you think you would enter, huh? What do you know, huh? How do you know truth? From the pit of your soul or just cause somebody told you? Do you think about what you think about? Do you see yourself in the people that you hang around? Keep quiet, let me think aloud. Listen up, wanna break it down and question your perceptions. I'ma break it down and question your perceptions. Do you ever question your perceptions? Do you ever question it? Oh yeah. What if your money was worthless? Then would you know what your worth is and reconsider living with a purpose? How would you determine what work is? Are you seeking what's easy to purchase, or is it deeper than what's on the surface? Do you question your perceptions? Ever so is real, huh? It ain't your politicians, nor your status. All of that is fiction, so it's real, huh? It ain't your entertainment, nor the industry. I heard it's filled with fake shit. And I need truth over everything. Yeah. I need truth above all else. Just I need truth over everything. Yeah, give me the truth, give me the truth, give me the truth, yeah.
All right, I got Dr. Luke Johnson right back on the show. I thought it was first of all, it was wonderful meeting you. I did feel personally presence means a lot to me. So like now that I've met you in person, this feels more comfortable than I think it would have had I not met you in person, if that makes sense.
Oh, it's great. I mean, look, I had a great time hanging out with you the other day. I mean, we obviously had some constraints from an audio perspective about what we could achieve in the limited public space that we had. But hopefully, I've talked to several individuals who have actually listened to the podcast that we produced on Sunday in the basement of the church, and I was concerned that, because there had to be such a heavy hand in the audio editing, that they may not have gotten something out of it. And I was kind of looking forward to doing something like this so they could have a more refined and crystal clear product. But the reviews were pretty good. I didn't think anyone was going to say anything to me about it. And I've had a lot of messages saying they really enjoyed it.
That's great to hear. To start, I just wanted to hook into that the last podcast that we did at your church, at your childhood church. One thing that I noticed, and I didn't want to make it about me since I had just met you, but your academic path really kind of resonated with mine. You said your father was kind of not aggressively, but pushing you and encouraging you toward natural science / biology specifically. You got to University of Richmond and more or less fell in love with philosophy. You did mention, did you get a double major, or did you end up with a major in philosophy? And
yeah, I did a double major, biology and philosophy. At one point, I was even trying to triple major. I think I was trying to do an education degree. I'm a highly competitive person, and so there was no one else who was doing that. So I was like, okay, I want to be that guy. Ultimately, it was unsustainable taking 21, 22 credit hours a semester or anything like that. So just did the double major. I was able to finish a little bit early. But then there were other parts of my academic career that got drawn out. So my PhD lasted way longer than I anticipated, but I got through my undergraduate and my master's pretty speedily.
I gotcha. So I was very math inclined. I think I told you, like, overly rational and logical as a child. And I was being pushed by my father to get into accounting, economics, business. I think he envisioned me as like a CEO of BB&T or something like this. And my very first professor, the one I actually sent you a link on earlier today, literally my first professor, David Bratt. Yes,
Brat or
sir.
Blatt?
Brat. Yep,
Yeah.
just like a brat. He was teaching what at Randolph-Macon is called a first year experience course, which is a little bit more dynamic than your typical 101. I do think the dark side of that is so that they hook you in because those credit hours aren't transferable. But it is 4 credit hours per semester, so it's even a little one more than your typical 3. Anyhow, the point is, I really made a good connection with him. He was starting the ethics department at Randolph-Macon at the time, and obviously ethics has philosophy courses, religion courses. And when I began taking those philosophy, well, really it was the first philosophy course I took, which I took on his recommendation. He's the chair of the economics department. He's recommending me take ethics courses. I take a philosophy class, fall in love with it. At that moment, my goal was to double major in economics. At Randolph-Macon, it's economics and business. They kind of bundle the two together. And dropped my accounting major. I was going to double major. My initial goal was the accounting econ business double major. Dropped the accounting, tried to do econ business philosophy. And I was going to be like 1 or 2 classes short on the econ business, and I would have had to go another semester. There was some family drama and my parents got divorced my spring semester of my senior year. So I just took the philosophy major, econ minor, and ethics minor, and ran with it. But I just say that to say that there was the mirror of your father pushing you in a certain direction, and philosophy kind of the love of philosophy, the love of wisdom, right? Philosophia taking over, taking over your spirit at some point and during your undergrad career. Anyways, that's more.
There were some minimal exposures to philosophy even when I was in high school. I don't know how relevant this is to your listeners or your interests, but like there were certain days where they would do this like student teacher swap where you were allowed to teach a grown up teacher's class. So I always chose to teach philosophy and religion classes for that day. I'm not exactly sure what drove me to that. I remember, it's an interesting concept to think about coming to this world kind of pre-programmed. I don't have any children of my own, but many people who do have children say that, they were like this from the beginning. And it's the reason why I bring this up is because it relates back to the environs of our previous conversation. I remember being in that church where we recorded that kind of guerrilla episode, and being like 4 or 5, 6, 7 years old, and being in like vacation Bible school and children's time and things like that, where I was actually like really flabbergasting, if that's a word, inducing the state of being flabbergasted into the adults, because I was always peppering them with questions. I kind of came into this world having a philosophical nature without even really understanding what philosophy was. I don't come from a long line of academics. I'm really I think I'm the first person in my family to ever do anything in graduate school with the humanities. I can't say for certain anyone else has even studied the humanities in college. There wasn't a long tradition of that. This is something that I found on my own, kind of came into this world ready to go. But I didn't really identify with philosophy until I guess I encountered the works of Friedrich Nietzsche in like a first year survey course. We had at Richmond, we called it core. And so you read some Freud, you read some world religion stuff, you read some books of the Bible, you read some philosophers. So yeah, Nietzsche is the one that really switched me on.
I gotcha. Yeah. During that episode, when we got it interrupted and you asked the children if they could provide us with a little bit of a quieter space, I had lost my train of thought a little bit. I maintained it to a decent degree, I think, but the part that I had lost was your startup. You mentioned you had begun a startup, I guess, right before, or you were in the midst of this startup when you had your awakening.
Yeah.
What happened to that startup? Did you trash it? Is it modified? Is there still hope for it?
Yeah. So in 2015, in 2014, 2015, I started teaching online for Coursera through some of my Kierkegaard connections, led me to do some online classes, just some survey courses on Kierkegaard. And I was not particularly thrilled with the way that Coursera was doing things, and I thought that I could do it better. I also was I really resisted technology and social media. I was kind of a latecomer to all of it, but then when I did get into it, I was very obsessive with like Facebook and MySpace and whatever else. And I was like, what if we were able to create these digital archives? And then I got really into Audible. I'm a super obsessive audiobook consumer. And the problem with all of that is I became increasingly isolated and alienated from everyone, but I didn't want to give up the acceleration of consciousness that I was experiencing with online learning. So the problem that I had that I thought was a universal problem as the result of the introduction of all this social media and technology was that after you get out of the academic environment, it's very difficult to find individuals that you share intellectual interests with. I mean, think about the difficult journey that we've been on to find each other, to be part of our little tribe here. It's been a long, lonely path. And I really wanted to lower that barrier to entry for individuals who may be stuck in flyover country outside of the university, et cetera. And that was really the conception of it, is like, what would it be like if you could have like an intellectual social media experience, you know? Because even at that time, people were complaining about how vapid social media was. I was like, okay, well, let's ratchet it up. Let's build this social media apparatus around a digital archive of audio lectures and audiobooks and preserved materials. And I thought it would work like gangbusters. And there was a lot of interest at the very beginning, but it didn't take long because essentially I had to build an online university. That's essentially what it became. And I had to take the blinders off and not just stay in my little lane of Soren Kierkegaard, but I had to exhibit some sort of mastery over things I never really studied before, things like poetry and history and, aspects of science that I wasn't really even that familiar with. And when I did that, that was a big part of my awakening, because you start to see trends and patterns that if individuals didn't have the specialization blinders on would be very unnerving. And then you realize how much of that is suppressed either unconsciously or consciously, and you start to see things differently. But yet I'd already set the ball in motion. I'd already kind of set the whole project going. So I was like, I have to make good on this. And I struggled with it for a long, long time. There was a lot of, I would say it was a really beguiling experience for a lot of reasons, and perhaps we can elaborate on that. But to answer the question more succinctly is that I finally mothballed it in 2022. It was called Noetic. And I finally mothballed it because I no longer wanted to sink any more intellectual and emotional energy into it, because I realized in that process that the problem that I wanted to solve about decreasing alienation and bringing people together over ideas was really only a problem for me. I had created a product that
I just have to say this. This podcast was originally called the Alienation Podcast.
Sure.
For all of the reasons that you're talking about right now.
And I could tell you so many different stories, but I realized that you cannot build a functional business in this environment. Of course, it's very obvious. You with your econ background would have seen this a mile away. I was much more idealistic. I thought my problem was everybody's problem. And I realized in that process that no, it's really only a handful of people's problems. And you cannot build a sustaining ecosystem if you're only addressing the needs of a handful of people. And that was a tough pill to swallow, because I had executed my vision. It worked great. And it really solved the problem I wanted to solve, but it did not have the financial backing or the model to be sustaining. Now, interestingly, I with the election of Donald Trump, he started to send out these like thought beams. He does these like 3-minute videos. He's like, "This is what we're gonna do," and da 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 da. And like a week after the election, he sent one of these thought beams out on like Twitter or Truth Social or whatever he's on. He's like, "I propose this thing called the American Academy, where we're gonna create this digital environment and provide all this free knowledge. And the way that we're going to pay for it is like find all these university endowments that are composed of the radical left or whatever else. And that's how we're going to finance it." And I was like, with the exception of wanting to find other universities, it's pretty much the entire thing that I made. And I guess I feel vindicated. I think the idea was ahead of its time. I'm not sure its time is now, but it seemed obvious to me to go ahead and make it because eventually people would catch up with it. But I just don't think we're there yet. And as someone who's been on this journey with me, I think you probably understand that truth seeking is limited to a very small percentage of the population. And the reality of it is that individuals don't tend to continue to educate themselves once they leave their formal education, their structured environment. It was kind of upsetting to me to realize how few people actually continue to read after they graduate college. It's not so great.
Yep. Before I move on, though, I just want to get your thoughts on why do you think that is? Why do you think our society is not truth seeking as a default? I mean, to me, it feels like it's natural and something is cutting people off from doing it. That maybe honestly, I think a big part of it is it's not cool. Is as shallow as that sounds, I think that's a huge part of it.
I think it's multifactorial. I think there's a lot of things going on. I mean, there's just you frequently you send me questionnaires in advance, like, how does this relate practically? What is your interest in, like, whatever the issue is, like these fringe topics or Kierkegaard or Young, you're like, how does the everyman like implement these ideas? And I'm like, Garnet, I have no idea. Like, I'm not really concerned with the application of ideas. And this is, clearly this was the fatal flaw of that endeavor, and possibly, my lack of social integration to this day. Why do people not seek the truth? There are so many different reasons. It might be the case that it's a result of some sort of pre-program, which we've discussed earlier. Like, why was I different from little kids when I came into this world? Like, why wasn't I like the others? Perhaps only certain individuals are implanted with that desire from the beginning. Now, I think there is a real active campaign from our world, again, if it's conscious or unconscious or directed, or there's nobody driving it. Whatever individuals do have that implanted desire for the truth are often led astray. I myself was led astray from the total pursuit of truth for the majority of my life. I spent, close to 20 years trying to be like a rock star, like while I was doing my PhD work and while I was doing a variety of other endeavors. It's really no longer a part of my personality. I thought truth and beauty were kind of like a hand in glove. I thought they went together. I guess I took the Grecian urn poem too seriously. They're not. Truth is like pretty ugly when you get into it. I mean, I think it can take you to some joyous, beautiful places, but I think it's an illusion to think that truth is going to be this beautiful thing. It's going to be an existentially terrifying thing if you really, truly pursue truth. So I think this world presents a lot of distractions. I got hooked into propaganda about being a rock star. And I didn't really think that there was any sort of like control in the music industry. I thought it was completely organic. And I don't think I have to tell you or your audience about how it's not. So for other people, it's greed, lust, whatever the 7 deadly sins are, right?
Distractions.
Sure, exactly. And that goes into the practical aspect of things. The people are struggling. So many people are struggling financially just to exist. It's hard to justify what little free time you have for the edification of the mind. if you're worried about like being able to pay your mortgage or afford groceries or whatever else, like you don't have,
and that stress can actually reduce your bandwidth to take in the information anyway during the little bit of free time you have.
Yeah, you don't have time to like I brought some things to look at here tonight. Okay, like I'm in 2025. You can go to my, by the way, you should go to my YouTube. Anybody who's interested in staying on top of things with me, I have an Instagram that I'm pretty active on, lajphd. You can just, if you want to talk to me, you can talk to me there. That's the best way to get a hold of me. But also I have this YouTube channel, which I think you've linked me to. It linked me in the description to the last video or something like that. But like 2025, I'm going to be doing like this 8-part series on Sir James Frazer's The Golden Bough, right? This is one of the most, are you familiar with this work?
No.
Oh,
I feel like I've heard of it, but
this is like a foundational text for the myth making that's involved in cinematography, and also it kind of functions as like the raw data for Carl Jung's theory of the archetypes. Right? Kind of goes through all these different societies and records their rituals and religious practices, whether it's in China, the Middle East, Africa. This was a really revolutionary text. This is the abridged version. There's like 22 volumes of this. This is like over 800 pages long, right? It's reading like 5 to 10 pages of this every day last year. Took me about 9 months to get through this. If you are starving or you don't know what your future is, et cetera, you do not have the time to do this, right? Like, so that's a big reason why people are not pursuing that. That's just one example.
I think that's an intellectual pursuit of truth. I think everyone has access to that spiritual truth.
I think, because I mean, clearly,
one thing I want to circle back to though is when you said that you don't feel that truth and beauty are the same. I don't know that I agree with that.
Sure, go for it. But by the way, I say that it's kind of a catch-all.
Yeah. I mean, the yin yang resonates with me deeply. So obviously, perspective means a lot here when you start getting into concepts as grand as beauty and truth.
I don't think you can have one without the other. I think what I'm trying to say here is that clearly my pursuit of truth, I wouldn't stay on the path if I was constantly terrified by it. But there's a dark side to the pursuit of truth, and I don't think people are properly prepared for how it will overwhelm you and terrify you. It's a numinous thing, you know. It's not all like getting high off intellectualism all the time.
I agree, but here's, I guess, my perspective on it is I do think that the pursuit of that is worth going through that, because the darkness and all of that actually comes from facing the fact that, at least for 99% of the civilized world, we believe so many lies about ourselves. And to face all of the lies that we've actually invested our belief in, it's our lives at stake, you know, and that heaviness, I think people do feel that. And so I do empathize with what you're saying in terms of it can be dark, but I also believe that it's totally worth going through that, because the truth is beautiful, and self-love and joy, that's at the end of that. So
I think we completely agree. I think we're on the same page. Okay. But it's not for the weak of heart.
And we're agreed on that one.
Okay.
You have to have a strong will. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a lot of different reasons. I mean, I think an aspect that we've talked about too is I think there's been so much relativism preached to everyone. I think a sizable portion of the population has truly integrated it into their worldview. So when you talk to highly intellectual people about the pursuit of truth, as if it is some sort of objective thing that can be reached, that's so off-putting to them, because they've so internalized the relativistic pursuit of their of knowledge. It's beyond them to contemplate it being some sort of intersubjective or objective phenomenon.
Yeah, that's a good point. One thing I caught editing watching our last video was me using the word mandala when I meant Mandela. I did just want to say I know the difference. I actually, I love mandalas. It was one of my first forays into art, so to speak, because of my incredibly mathematically inclined nature. It's to me, mandalas are, you know, for lack of a better word, it's a perfect balance between that geometric, math-minded world and art. So, anyways, just wanted to make that point. I do know the difference between a mandala and Mandela, but to segue from that, I did have one question about the Mandela effect.
I haven't figured it out. It's what got me into this game, but I.
So, assuming it's true, right? Passing the debate of whether it's true or not, assuming the Mandela effect is true, what practical or pragmatic changes should we as individuals? I know you say you don't know what to say about the layman, but I was going to ask that as well. But what changes should we make as individuals, assuming it is true? Or what would you also, if you were the president or the leader of the society, what changes would you make to society, or maybe even just education, to keep it simple?
Jeez, Louis, this is such a big question, man.
It is, but that's fun. That's what's fun to talk about.
I mean, at the bare minimum, as far as like what an individual should do, I think they should. I mean, if it's a true phenomenon, and this is what's so interesting about it, is that people are pretty dug in on this. Like, I didn't really want to acknowledge it. There are people who will, try to demonstrate that it's not real and that it's like all like a psychological operation, that it's not really part of the material reality, not part of the actual metaphysics of the realm. There's a lot of energy that's expended into that.
That's fine, but there's always energy that's expended defending the status quo. So that is the status quo.
But there's a lot of people I respect who, as if we're going to call them truthers, who really hate this. They really, really hate it. But assuming it is true, I mean, I think at the very least for the common man, if it's possible, I think it really points to that we live in an illusion. I think we live in some sort of rendering simulation of some sort. These are very uncomfortable ideas for me to embrace. It's something I didn't want to believe. I'm not totally settled on what the nature of the simulation is. I tend to use dream language like we used in our previous conversation, because there does seem to be some sort of alchemical puzzle language to it that is symbolic, visual, with repeating archetypal patterns, rather than digital computer code. I know like people who are really into gematria see it like the ones and zeros of the matrix, and that may be a layer to it, but I see something else.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about this a lot lately too. I was like, has there been like someone who's like seriously like done like the philosophy of dreams? And the only thing I can really think of is going back to Jung and Freud, and I don't have a great grasp on what Jung and Freud say about these things. And I'm just like, I'm going to have to dig into this to get a really good understanding of it. So, I mean, I think the best practical thing that it can offer is to not get too attached to the flux, the warps and woofs of reality, to practice some sort of detachment from it, to not let it throw you off your center. But how it's going, knowledge of this and how it's going to like make you money or have a better like relationship or something like that. I'll go back to what I said earlier. This is going to deeply problematize all your business aspirations, all your relationships. I mean, I can't tell you, like this like destroyed my life in a lot of ways, and I've had to rebuild it because these are the hills I'm prepared to die on. I don't spend all day evangelizing to people about the Mandela effect, but other taboo subjects I am kind of uncompromising about. And so you ask me these practical questions, I'm like, this is going to problematize your life. And I guess I'm okay with that, because Kierkegaard, who I did my dissertation on, I don't know if you've ever heard this anecdote. He I think he was nearing completion of his dissertation.
I have to say, it's only a problem if you want to continue living in the lies, though. Otherwise, it's just shaking things up so that you can start getting on the path to truth.
Right, but it's going to be very bumpy. But like I said, I'm okay with things being bumpy because Kierkegaard.
I'm listening. I just want to grab a book. Keep talking.
Sure. Yeah. Kierkegaard. I think towards the end of his PhD work, didn't know what to do with his life. He didn't really see that he had anything to offer the world. He's like, I'm so intelligent, but I can't make anybody's life any better. Like, he was living at a time of industrialization where steam engines were coming on the scene and machines were becoming ubiquitous and life was becoming easier. And he's like, I cannot make the world easier. And he had this revelation. He's like, all I can do is make life harder. And so Kierkegaard devoted himself to problematizing the relationship between faith and objective reality and the institutions of his day. So he actually made life harder for everyone and made his life harder so much so that he died prematurely. He died at age 42. So because I had him as like some sort of template, I haven't been like super obsessed with like helping anyone out. It's like, I'm helping you by introducing you to the struggle that you're going to have to do this labor. And I can't promise you that it's going to end up all right. I think ultimately that's going to be a communication that comes to you from God. What was the other question you asked?
Society, on a societal
level, if I was president or something?
Well, all right, see, regardless of that, how would you align society's function behavior with a worldview that encompasses a causality or the possibility of Mandela effect phenomena?
Gosh, I've never, it's interesting is like when I was in high school and like even in college, I was like, I'm going to be president one day. I think like in the back of my mind, maybe like every man thinks they're going to be president one day. I'm not exactly sure.
At some point, I'm sure.
I'm sure that program gets beaten. Like, knowing what I know now, like I want to stay far, far away from power. So I got rid of those illusions about what I would do if control was ever given to me. I mean, look, there's so much within our society that we don't need. Like a lot of our society is like totally fake. Like a lot of our occupations and industries, you're getting me so candid. I wonder if I'm going to regret any things I'm going to say on here, but like so many of our occupations and industries are really just there to keep us busy. Like it's like kind of a giant playground, and I don't want to try to dunk on anyone, like, and say, oh, your vocation or what you do or this particular industry doesn't matter. But like when you come to the reality of how much illusion we live in, many people are parts of systems that perpetuate the illusion. So I guess the first thing I would do is like, yeah, we got to get rid of this illusion. And I know there are a few places that are pretty obvious about where we would start to me. And I don't know. I think everybody's like got to take some time to study and confront some things that may be very uncomfortable. I think that's happening anyway. Like people had like 2 years off during COVID to have an open book test, and everybody's got supercomputers and all the information in the world. I don't know if I could force feed it to anyone, I guess I would try to create a culture that valued truth seeking over any other pursuit. But I'd have to think about what those reforms would be outside of how I currently lead by example.
Right. So I was trying to pull up a preview because I did end up giving this book to a friend, lending it to a friend. But basically, the whole point was you had mentioned that there were no philosophers that had really studied dreams. Well,
I don't know that for certain. I'm sure there are. who they are escapes me.
Right.
It was not
well, they're obviously not promoted, or
yeah,
I mean, they're not the popular ones. But no, the entire Toltec, the Ruiz family specifically are the ones that I've studied, and the foundational book, the centerpiece of their entire, as far as all of their books are concerned, is the Four Agreements. The Four Agreements, the first two sentences are, "You are living in a dream." I can't quote it. That's why I was looking for it, because I didn't want to mess up the quote. But it's basically, you're living in a dream. Everything around you is a dream. Like, this is all a dream. And their entire work, everything is based around that idea that we are living in a dream. And all, we can write our own story, but we have to first take inventory of the agreements that we've already made. This takes a lot of will, because you have to dredge up the subconscious. They don't use this exact terminology, but I'm kind of trying to blend a more traditional philosophical language with this. That's part of the balancing act. But the whole thing is, definitely check out the Toltec wisdom books. They are near and dear to me, for sure. But that's not what this podcast is about tonight. So
I've been trying to dig into it. You're talking about the Carlos Castaneda stuff.
So Castaneda was the one that definitely brought the Toltec worldview into the public sphere. Don Miguel has, so a big part of Castaneda's cult following recognizes plant medicines, and it was a lot about the ceremonies around peyote and different psychoactive plants, essentially. Don Miguel basically says that you don't need them.
Interesting what his reasoning is, if it's similar to what we talked about last time about that being able to induce those experiences without the help.
Yeah, through meditation, you can access basically any of them. I do think for me, I probably would have never been able to break out of the NPC world that I was in without something powerful enough to break me out of it. But I definitely think it's possible to do it without. I also think that there's a super yin yang relationship between plant medicines, which, in my opinion, falsely get classified as drugs. They're so different. It's not even. It's embarrassing that they're in the same class as pharmaceuticals in any way, shape, or form. But they kind of allow you to see that sobriety is a high in and of itself. What I mean?
Well, I think that's, I don't know if that came out much in our first conversation, but I've been pretty radically devoted to sobriety for a long time. And this conversation has been happening in my circle. Someone said recently that sobriety was like the greatest trip. And like every day for me is like, I mean, I guess people would say I'm detached from reality, but like, I feel like I live in like a Salvador Dali painting. Like every day for me.
Well, he's a perfect example, because he did use mescaline at one. He admitted it in one of his autobiographies.
Dali did.
But he did. He used mescaline when he was in his younger years, but he didn't do it to fuel his art, to fuel his work. It was like a one-time experience that sort of more or less transformed him, allowed him to see things differently. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm sober or anything like that, but I really think that intention plays a large role in consuming anything. Food. I mean, there's a reason people, praying over food is a thing.
Sure.
Intention plays a large role with everything, but especially anything that you consume, and especially anything you consume that can have psychoactive results.
I'm sure it has its place. I mean, I don't
advocate for it unless people feel called to do it. If you like, for somebody like you who's already there, I would personally say I don't even advocate for it. But it's also something that if somebody's feeling called to do it, do your research, be responsible about it, set and setting, dosage, these things matter. But again, that's not what this podcast is about. I've got some other things I want to talk about. So that was kind of everything from hooking into the last episode and introducing this episode. But I did want to get a brief, not a full presentation for now, but a brief on the importance of Kierkegaard's work. I admit I've essentially forgotten all of my formal study of him. As I mentioned, we barely glossed over him anyway in my philosophy study
Sure.
15, 16, 17 years ago now. I do remember, however, being attracted to his writings, and I remember that they contained true paradoxes, which embodies the balancing act. The only other philosopher from my academic years that I remember having an affinity for was Spinoza. Once I graduated, my studies focused more on the occult, Gnostic mystery schools, these types of interests, and especially the Toltec lifestyle, which I've already brought up, which emphasizes a more intuitive and less logical or rational approach to life, which in itself was a balancing act for me because I was so rational and logical and analytical for the first 18 years of my life. But therefore, I have forgotten much of the substance contained in both Spinoza and Kierkegaard, aside from the fact that Spinoza was a pantheist and Kierkegaard was an existentialist. What do you feel Kierkegaard's work offers today's world, and how can we benefit from a better understanding of his work?
Well, I have to confess this. I've not seriously wrestled with Kierkegaard since I defended my dissertation. So I had my awakening and all that like in 2016. I defended my dissertation early in 2017 and really haven't looked back. Now, I did a great deal before then. So, we're getting 8 years on from this. This is how long I've been awake now. But I can say something about it because it's in the file cabinet of my mind somewhere. Why should, so the question is, why should we study Soren Kierkegaard? I mean, that's the question, right?
Or how can an individual benefit from
sure
looking at his work, and how could
there's a variety of different things that I could say about this. I mean, okay, so why if you are in an environment that allows you to have the life of the mind and the edification of it, why you should study Soren Kierkegaard, say, over someone else? I think he is a wonderful stylist, and this in part is a disservice for him when it comes to the current structure of the academy. So much of how he writes and makes his point is poetic. Not that he doesn't have great logical rigor or philosophical vitality in the contemporary sense in his writings, but it does offer such a beautiful change of pace. It's not unlike Nietzsche in the way that he writes with his Sturm und Drang, except that Kierkegaard, I think, is ultimately going to end up in a much more hopeful scenario, although the Nietzscheans would probably question what I just said there and said that Nietzsche is a philosopher of hope as well. And that may be true. I'm somewhat removed from Nietzsche as well. But in a lot of ways, I think they're two sides of the same coin. So I think stylistically, it is very edifying to study Soren Kierkegaard, and looking at his works like Training in Christianity, Works of Love, even some of the more rigorous aspects of Fear and Trembling. I think those are fantastic. As far as the importance of what Soren Kierkegaard tried to do in his project, I think it's really great in terms of enunciating these paradoxes for different life stages, and people understanding that there are limits in terms of their modes of being, whether it be an aesthetical worldview, an ethical worldview, a quasi-religious, an ethico-religious worldview, a type of religiousness, and ultimately a inward deepening of passion in a Christian commitment, which he ultimately advocated for. So I think it's fascinating to try to get a sense of his stage theory and how far one can go within those stages so that they can develop a more meaningful life. I think it was very essential for me in terms of my truther awakening that Kierkegaard showed me the limits of each of those stages of one's personality so that I had to become utterly dependent on God. And when I did that, I remember thinking it was okay to ask God for the download, for the truth, I just wanted to know the truth. And when I did that, it was like a spigot that was turned on and there was no turning it off. And that allowed me to get to the state of consciousness that I'm at right now, which I obviously view as preferable to anything that I had before. Although, as we've talked about in this podcast, it certainly has its elements of persecution. So I would say those are the strong reasons why one should study Soren Kierkegaard. Not to mention that it may have something to do with your eternal salvation if you believe in an afterlife.
Do you?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I'm not convinced I'm not in the afterlife already. But that's not a teaching of Soren Kierkegaard. This is me
right. No, but
trying to contemplate what the Mandela effect
implies,
is. And, yeah.
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 I mean, I'm very open-minded to the thought experiment of this is already the afterlife, but this is just now. I believe calling it an afterlife is, I don't like that word, but yes, I believe in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, what I'm saying, anything I would add on to that is not a view of Soren Kierkegaard. He didn't go into are we secretly in hell or purgatory, or that's not him. That's
right.
You know, I hope I can relate a synchronicity, a real wild synchronicity that I had that I'd just like to get on record. I've told a couple people about it, but perhaps your audience would enjoy it.
Yeah, go for it.
So if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see right now I'm doing a Bible study on the Gospel of Luke. And we got a little bit behind on the schedule. And on Tuesday night, did chapter 6. And in chapter 6, there's actually a biblical Mandela effect. I'm sure everybody has heard the expression "judge not, lest ye be judged," right?
Oh yeah, that's the most popular phrase out of the Bible in today's culture.
It never happened. It's not in the Bible. It's not there. And so people, this happens. People take expressions of Ben Franklin or something like that, and they think it's biblical, but they don't know where it comes from. This is not the case. You actually, if you go searching for it, you will find many ministers and theologians talking about "judge not, lest ye be judged," who know the Bible backwards and forwards much better than me, and they're unaware that it's not in the Bible. So if you go and you look it up, it's not there. It's phrased differently. And I made a point in the Bible study to point this out. This is a biblical Mandela effect. I haven't, it is what it is. I cannot deny that there are Mandela effects in the Bible. This is one of them. And I turned on, after we had done the Bible study, I turned on The Waking Life. Have you seen The Waking Life? It's about,
yeah, that's one of my favorite movies.
Right. So I turned it on, and, you have a character who's participating in all these random discursive conversations. He's just sort of listening, and he realizes,
dream traveling.
Right. He's lucid dreaming, he's dream traveling, and he starts to contemplate whether or not he's dead because he cannot wake up out of the dreams within dreams. And within like the first 20 minutes of that movie, there's like this satanic figure, this like criminal that's in this cage. I don't know if you remember him. He's turning red.
Yeah. He's the one that puts the cigarette out on his head at the end, right?
Exactly. And in his cage, as he turns redder and redder, he goes, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." And I had just done the Bible study on "Judge not, lest ye be judged" and mentioned it was a Mandela effect. Then the Mandela effect shows up in a movie about lucid dreaming in potentially a dead state. And yeah. I just was like, okay, like this is kind of confirmation about what I'm trapped in. I am trapped in this dream world with possibly a handful of other real souls who are trapped here with me. We talked about how many real people there are here. There's an interesting exchange early on in that movie where the main character is starting to get hip to the idea that he's trapped in a dream and that he's starting to take agency in it. And he runs into this woman in like a subway, and they have this conversation. And halfway through the conversation, he realizes that she's a figment of his dream imagination.
Right.
And he goes, "What's it like being a projection," or something like this? "What's it like being a projection of my dream?" And she glitches out. She can't answer it. And I thought, how many times have so many of us who've tried to get people to see our point of view, whether it's like about whatever our pet cause is, the unreality of the world, the Mandela effect, cosmology, whatever else, and you're just greeted with that blank stare, that glitching out. And I was like, is this kind of the revelation that we're dealing with dream characters? And I think it might be. I'm not sure, but it happened right there with the whole Mandela effect that I had previously included in the Bible study. So I feel like there's something to that. Not that, suggestions from film should ultimately be how we frame our worldview, but to be honest, the way things are going, it seems like something's bleeding through the film to try to nudge us along. And this is kind of like, it's almost like this alien technology, they almost like these monoliths that have been given to us in order to communicate these ideas. And sometimes it's more effective than the philosophy books.
So there's a scene in that movie where he's like watching TV. It's like at the end of one of his little conversations, and he's like flipping through the channels. One of the channels that he flips to is talking about, the shamanic reality is that we all live in a dream.
Yeah.
And the Toltec, it's funny you mentioned like, are we, in hell or whatever? So the Toltecs would say that we actually are dreaming hell right now, and that's why society is in the state that it is. And it's rooted in our beliefs about ourselves first, and then each other and human nature. All of these things, all of our beliefs about those are leading to us living in the dream of hell right now. But we are waking up, and there is a new dream on the horizon. Once we awaken to the truth and confront all of the lies that we've been believing and enacting and creating this kind of depressing world in a lot of ways. But anyhow, I'm rambling a little bit, but yeah,
no, that's good.
That was perfect because we're about to go into Young anyhow, but during that little break, I was also able to find what I was looking for, and this is so freaking perfect.
Okay, cool.
What you are seeing and hearing right now is nothing but a dream. You are dreaming right now in this moment. You are dreaming with the brain awake. Dreaming is the main function of the mind, and the mind dreams 24 hours a day. It dreams when the brain is awake, and it also dreams when the brain is asleep. The difference is that when the brain is awake, there is a material frame that makes us perceive things in a linear way. When we go to sleep, we do not have that frame, and the dream has the tendency to change constantly. That's just the start. That's literally the start of the book.
Which book is this?
The Four Agreements.
Oh, the Four Agreements. Yeah, this is about right. I mean, and earlier I said, there's not like a lot of philosophy on dreams. There certainly is. Like, Descartes touches on this, right? And Berkeley will touch on this, as far as what is part of the objective world. I think I have to revisit when I was first exposed to that stuff, like before my awakening, like it was thought experiments. You didn't really take it seriously. Like, oh, this could be the case that I'm being deceived by an evil demon. Like now that seems a lot more likely that there's some sort of AI demiurge.
Archon.
Yeah.
Control matrix or something. Yeah. But yeah, that was all I had on Kierkegaard for tonight. I did want to get a little bit more.
I don't know how much more I remember. It's funny, every once in a while I interact with like people like Kierkegaard experts from my past who I've stayed friends with. I'm like, oh, I am out of practice. I don't remember very much. But in my defense, I've learned so much more. My mind it's interesting. I'm wearing this half full shirt. I've always claimed that my mind can hold a great deal, but at a certain point it starts to spill out and things are.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
So I asked you last time, what is an archetype? I asked ChatGPT, and I just wanted to get your take on, is this a good definition? Archetypes are universal, archaic patterns and images that derive from the collective unconscious and are the psychic counterpart of instinct. They are innate, universal prototypes for ideas and may be expressed in symbols, myths, and behaviors.
I think it's about right. I don't know if I'd call them archaic because that makes it sound like outdated. They're no longer relevant. I would call them primordial, perhaps. Okay.
Perfect. Great answer. And the definition of collective unconscious it gave was Jung proposed that beside the personal unconscious, unique to each individual, there exists a deeper layer called the collective unconscious. This is shared by all humans or humanity and contains the archetypes. Is that an accurate definition of the collective unconscious?
Yeah, I'd say that's about right. Again, and if anyone's listened to our part one, I hesitate to call myself some sort of Jungian expert because this wasn't part of my structured education. I'm having to teach it to myself. So
Toltecs wasn't a part of my structured education, and if there's anything that I consider myself an expert on, but I don't, because nobody's. It's an art. It's an art. You can't.
Mm,
You can't. Some of the books are called, like, there's the mastery of self, the
mm,
mastery of love, but it's mastery. It's not mastering.
mm-hmm.
You see,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
an art.
Well, I'm so very much a student. I've given a lot of presentations on Jung on Realize Radio and my own YouTube channel and Aeon Bytes, and we'll do some stuff in the future. But largely, when I do those presentations, the reason why I'm doing them is I found through all the teaching that I did at the university level, and I think this is not a revelatory concept. I think anyone can agree to this. It's that when you try to teach somebody something, that's when you really start to integrate it into your being and have a true understanding of it.
Absolutely. Trying to teach something is a great gauge on how well you actually know it. If you can teach it, that's like novice level of mastery right there. But then the more you teach it, and you already know.
Yeah, that's why it's so interesting. You were like you wanted to have these more informal conversations, which I guess is like what most podcasts are, and it reflects how like I'm like, well, if I'm going to get on camera, I have to have like lecture notes and I have to know what I'm going to say. And it's like my responsibility. So I very rarely do these like freewheeling, like, well, I don't know where it's going to go. I haven't done any prep work.
No worries at all. So to get a little bit deeper into Jung, because for the same reason that you just mentioned, even though you don't have a formal education on him, I have listened to some of your presentations on HV's channel, and it was great. But I want to take it into, like, because I have an affinity with these ideas, and I feel like it actually maps really well onto the Toltec worldview, but it's coming at it from an angle where we might be able to get more people to see, so to speak, right? I do want to get into, like, how can these ideas function in today's world, and how can individuals apply these ideas to their lives. So again, it's some notes I kind of paraphrased here. Jung believed, or the psychological development aspect is, Jung believed that interacting with these archetypes through dreams, art, or myths could lead to individuation, a process of integrating one's personality where one becomes more whole.
Right.
How do you feel? Does that sound like a
That's
positive,
that's the
practical
idea.
application?
That's
Right.
the idea. But I have a very objective relationship to the Jungian material where I'm like, what does he say? He does say that. I have not personally integrated my shadow. That's like,
I
that's a
think
big part
that's
of.
a
I've never.
constant.
I don't go to a therapist. I don't have an analyst. Like, this is an interesting thing. That's part of a lot of the Jungian community. Nearly everyone that I've interacted with online who's interested in Jung is interested in a pragmatic outcome, like wholeness, whatever, or individuation, whatever these concepts are. Whereas
Right.
I'm just like, I want the metaphysics, if there is one. And we've talked about this in terms of the onus mundus and panentheism. That's really what I'm after. But I've personally not followed some sort of Jungian guideline to become a whole person. I'm not exactly sure if that could even be communicated. I'd have to work with someone more directly to know what that's like. So the majority of the Jungian stuff that is out there is from an applied perspective, which I have relatively little to say about.
I got you.
I mean, I could offer some things. I know I could offer some anecdotes about some of Jung's cases that he talked about over the years about getting people out of schizophrenia and delusions and things like that. But I don't have firsthand experience with it. That sounds like a major letdown. But
no, I mean, it's honest. It's honesty, which that's always something I value. So, thank you.
mm-hmm.
So, from a cultural expression perspective, archetypes manifest in cultural symbols, literature, religion, and art, reflecting deep-seated human experiences and emotions. Can you comment on cultural examples of Jungian art, literature, religion?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's I mean, how exhaustively I could do it is up for some
So,
debate.
no. So, just what are some examples that come to the forefront of your mind that?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I think there's no limit to the amount of Jungian archetypes there are. I think in general, there is this sort of like, oh, there are exactly 12 and they map onto the zodiac and et cetera, et cetera. And that's why we see this repeating number of 12. But there could be hundreds or thousands of them as far as we know. And they amalgamate in all sorts of different ways. But there's like the innocent, the trickster, the sage, the wise old man, right? And individuals like this, the magician. So as far as like how this manifests in literature, I mean, I think the Arthurian legends are of a particular interest. Is just cite one sort of mythology that individuals might be. Actually, I believe Jung's daughter. I have her book, but I have not had a chance to get through it. Specifically applied Jung's ideas to that. I think you can talk about this in terms of the Bible, cinema. I'm particularly interested. What I'm interested in, I have a lot of things. I'm particularly interested in the space program. Okay, that's like what I get really animated about, and it's not lost on me that there are exactly 12 moonwalkers. I find that to be super fascinating. I don't know how it all slots yet, but I think each moonwalker may correlate to a Jungian archetype. I don't know who's who, but I think that might be possible.
I find it interesting that you mentioned, amalgamations of them. I actually do see archetypes in that way, where it's like it's not just three in the sense of primary colors, but to make the analogy, I feel like there's like 12 or however many, 9, whatever you might say, primaries, and then there are amalgamations. In fact, the character or the figure that I had sent you a little blurb on in Buddhism, the Krishti Garba, I feel like he's an amalgamation of the wise elder, as well as the hero, and then also you can even say the shadow, and maybe even a hint of the trickster in there. And for people who don't know what I'm talking about, this figure made a famous vow not to achieve Buddhahood until all hells are emptied, which means he chooses to remain in a state where he can help beings in suffering realms rather than entering into full Buddhahood. Um, yeah, so basically, to me, the reason I find that so touching is it's truly embodying the truth that we're all one, because his recognition is like, I'm not free of hell until we all are, because I am you and you are me. It's truly acting on and truly integrating that idea, and making it real. So
yeah, there's a lot to be said about this. There's a text that I've started on. There's a reader called the Gnostic Jung that I think deals with this idea of the evolution of spirit through time and the archetypes and the collective unconscious. I can't, it's something I'd like to present on in the future, but I don't have a great enough grasp on it to speak right now.
Yeah.
But I would say, going back to your question, it's not just in what I see, and I want to make sure that I've got this right about Jung. Is in general, I specified that I was interested in the metaphysics of Jung, if there is one. He claimed to not be interested in metaphysics. He wasn't that type of thinker, but I think secretly there is one there. And I think the idea is that perhaps the collective unconscious is connected to the physical reality in some sense that we all participate in, the physical reality. So you can kind of see it organizing even the outer world, whatever that means. A lot of these ideas are coming from the Platonic forms as well. I don't think we even have to look. This is a theory I'm developing. I don't even know if we have to necessarily look at lore and mythology that is codified, say the Arthurian legend, to see the archetype manifest in our world. I don't even think we have to wait for certain individuals to show up. I see it in nature.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, in the past month, about a month ago, I think it really showed up in a major way. I can't remember if we talked about this. Did we talk about squirrels?
You mentioned squirrels as like one of the trickster archetypes.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to recommend some books. these two books have been absolutely essential. I think everyone needs to have this. I got this. This is the
Symbols.
Penguin Dictionary of Symbols. I got this at a used bookstore for $7. And this thing, I think everyone should have a copy of it, walk around with it. And when something unusual presents itself, crack it open to this. And if you kind of believe in a mythopoetic reality that is dreamlike in nature, whenever those things are presented, I think there's a wealth of kind of stable history that is associated with the appearance of these certain images that are going to connect back to the Jungian archetypes. And then this is one that's been particularly helpful to me, a critical dictionary of Jungian analysis, to get an even greater telescopic perspective on what these different concepts are, be it the shadow or the other archetypes that we've mentioned. And yeah, like I see it manifest in nature. I think God, or the collective unconscious of God, working through everything, including animals. And I thought it was so interesting, this squirrel, this Peanut the squirrel that appeared on the timeline, right? Mm-hmm. It's so clearly connected. Like the squirrel is a trickster archetype. The trickster is kind of like alter the timeline. And it wasn't just the squirrel that showed up at the same time, right? There was also a raccoon. And like raccoons are very like, right, there was like Fred the raccoon and Peanut the squirrel that both got like taken out by like the I guess animal control or something like that in upstate New York right before the election. And it caused this backlash. People were suddenly very anti authoritarian control because this cute squirrel was euthanized for no reason. They're trickster figures, and that was like a major thing that like reset like the perspectives on the election. Even so, like when Kamala did her like concession speech, a squirrel ran across the stage like right before she was going to do that. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah.
And these animals are constantly presenting themselves as like, if you are attuned to it, they're kind of foreshadowing the future. It's not just animals. Like, I like there are other things like the airplanes. Like I've noticed all the airplanes, you know, this past year and a half or so. I've been tracking this probably since the fall of 2023. There's been all these incidents on airplanes, and even there's something very Icarian about this, like where this fabricated reality is like coming crashing to the ground as a new.
I was going to say, to me, it seems like planes have kind of been a thing since MH370.
Oh yeah, it's been going on longer than that. But yeah, I'm just saying it really ramped up where it's like every other day, it's like some story about how terrible the planes are, and all the planes are coming crashing down. And I think this is representative of like this fabricated idealistic worldview that we built up. Is like, I see it symbolically as not really applicable anymore. It's coming crashing down. And even the past couple of days, I'm seeing all sorts of, or in really all year, there've been stuff with tunnels. But the past couple of days, there's all this weird stuff breaking out on the subway tunnels. I haven't quite figured out what that means, but I feel like that's something that's brewing. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like, it's not just people who fulfill certain sort of archetypal expectations. I see it
embedded in
the entire world.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm with you, man. I mean, the yin yang is not just like a hippie thing to me. It's a symbol that has spoken to me very, very deeply on a level at which it's impossible to deny the vitality of symbols.
Yeah. I think Jung would be okay with this too. You know, I think he fully first convinced himself of the phenomenon of synchronicity. You may have heard this from one of the presentations that I gave, but he was analyzing this very rationalistic, Cartesian mindset female who he wasn't able to make any progress with because she was not open to a greater understanding of reality and herself. And she was telling him about a dream about a golden scarab beetle, and he was kind of as she was telling him this dream, he had the window open, and a golden beetle flew in and landed on his pen, And he goes, "Is this the beetle you are searching for?" And at that moment, he was able to induce like an epiphany and enlightenment, being like, okay, look, the world is so much more than whatever your rationalistic concepts are that are hemming it in.
Right.
And only then was he able to have some sort of analytical breakthrough with her. And so I don't really think, I don't know Jung well enough to say like, oh, he would say this and he'd say that. But I think that example alone, I think, should make us comfortable with the idea of like nature and animals speaking to us about a deeper reality.
Oh, absolutely. In that little blurb on Jung from the Chat GPT, it says Jung's work on archetypes invites a deeper look into human nature, suggesting that our psyche has layers that connect us beyond individual experience to a shared human essence. That's perfect to me. I want to get into the idea. Have you ever heard of the idea? I'll skip some of the stuff to get to this idea of interbeing. Have you ever heard of this concept proposed by Thich Nhat Hanh and also further popularized by Charles Eisenstein?
Not by that name. I mean, I might be able to relate it to something else I've come across, but no, I don't know it by that name.
It's basically that blurb on Carl Jung kind of summarized it, but it is this idea that we do not exist outside of our relationship with everything, with the reality itself, with other people. Thich Nhat Hanh comes at it from an angle of this deep interdependence on all things. Nothing exists in isolation. Eisenstein kind of frames it in a more narrative way, to me, very analogous to the Toltec's idea of we're dreaming hell, but we've got a new dream of heaven coming through the awakening. He says that we're transitioning or shifting from what he calls the story of separation to a story of interbeing, which is basically still this idea that we recognize and live within the web of relationships, and that defines our existence. So it's a philosophy that challenges the individualism of modern society, advocating for a more holistic, interconnected approach to life, where the health and actions of one are seen as intimately linked to the health and actions of all. Do you resonate with that idea of the self?
Gosh, these are the biggest questions. I'm such a radical individualist. Part of when I built my startup, that was when I was most.
That's America, baby.
Yeah, when I was building my startup, that was the most collectivist mindset I ever had. I was like, look, I'm going to raise the enlightenment bar for everyone. I'm going to give this education to everyone. I have since learned that that was a fool's errand, right? How do I view my own consciousness as it is connected to the collective? I mean, this all presupposes that everything here is kind of on the same level, and that everybody is taking this giant step forward to begin with. I'm suspicious of that. And I don't really know how to integrate all these different ideas. On the one hand, I do see, like going back to the animals, I do see these upgrades in consciousness. I see animals doing things that I never saw them doing before. Like, it seems like people are capturing with their smartphones, like incredible works of intelligence. I know you see these like dogs who like can talk by pressing the buttons. Have you seen this one where it was like this woman had taught their dog so much in terms of language that the dog then asks his owner why it's a dog? Like, he doesn't understand that like there's this natural order of things, and so the dog goes, the dog taps on the buttons and goes, dog? Why me, Sandy, dog? Like, and the owner's like, oh boy, I was not prepared for this, right? It's not just like, I want food, I want toy. It's the animals are starting to ask themselves philosophical questions. And I think there's remarkable displays of intelligence that I didn't know that animals were capable. Maybe they've been doing this the entire time, but it seems like to me that a lot of animals are getting an upgrade. But at the same time, I'm seeing like profound denigration amongst so many individuals. There seems to be like a lot of chosen stupidity and groupthink. I've never seen such mass hysteria and so many other the majority of human beings regressing. So I'm not exactly sure how to square all that. I do tell people that I kind of like the biblical parable of the wheat and the tares, and I think that maybe Jesus was saying something much deeper there than any of us really know. That there's possibly a lesson there about differences of spirit. And I say all of this with the caveat. I'm not trying to create some sort of hierarchy or process of deeming some individuals subhuman and therefore they can be exploited. I don't think we really have great information to determine who's an NPC and who's not. But
is it possible for an NPC to wake up?
I don't know.
See, I feel like I feel like I am proof that is possible.
What makes you think that
I was NPC as fuck?
Why do you think you were? I've always been kind of eccentric and different and on the outside looking in. So I can't, though I would say I was much more integrated into the societal programs. I don't think I don't think I was ever an NPC. I was always kind of a weirdo.
Outside of my proclivity for math and the fact that I was like with the whiz kid, the gifted kid. I mean, yeah, I definitely was. I had a unique upbringing. Both of my parents were kind of like black sheeps in a way, and both of their families were relatively wealthy, or at least in my mom's case, like wealthy in status, kind of older money, and then on my dad's side, military, officer, high ranking, and he's kind of like a military brat that parties all the time. So I definitely saw like high society, and I experienced that as a child, but I also saw, drug and alcohol use to a large extent, and the underworld, as some people might call it. So the balancing act really is like a kind of euphemism for my life itself, honestly. And that I never felt regard.
Yeah, I don't. As far as myself, like I always felt there was the spark to overcome the previous iterations of myself and to expand my consciousness. I never thought it would take me to where I am right now, but I think there was always this striving to overcome the limitation. And when I look back at previous iterations of myself, I want to beat up on myself for being perhaps distracted, like we talked about earlier in this conversation, maybe in a haze because maybe I was deluded in terms of like music pursuits or something of that nature. But at my core, there was still that little boy who came into the world who desperately wanted to know why things were the way they were. And I can't really say I went from NPC to like main character. I think there was always that striving spirit to have that next breakthrough of consciousness. So I can't really say what it would be like to just not be filled with the ideas of God and truth and beauty and things like that in your head. Although I remember like when I was doing PhD work, again, the narcissistic side of me would be like, oh, everybody's oriented towards these questions and pursuits. And I'd like go out on dates and stuff like that. And I'd like talk to women and they'd be like, yeah, I'm not interested in going into a deep philosophical place with you at all. Like that was very strange to me. Like I kind of assumed everybody had that built into them and they were kind of pursuing it in their own way, whether it was like through art or through engineering or through science. I just felt like we were all kind of gifted the same faculties and inclinations and developing them along our own instincts and talents. But I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the case. So I can't really say, I can't really say what it's like to go from NPC to this new being. I think I've always been trying to overcome and strive to become the thing that I am now. And there's something in the future that I cannot anticipate that I likely will become as long as I keep this persistence about me.
Yeah, no, persistence is an honorable quality for sure.
But you say you were an NPC. What are the qualitative differences between being an NPC and what you are now?
I think one of the biggest ones is that um, NPCs fear what other people think about them. That's their driving objective is to fit in.
Yeah,
Like
no, I don't know anything about that.
yeah.
I mean,
That leads to alcohol use.
yeah,
Watching football. Which I mean, I don't have any problem with watching football, but just being into that. Like knowing all the players and all the stats and being able to talk that language with the guys. You know what I mean? Um, I think it's just a more tribal, primitive part of ourselves. And as somebody that is sensitive to indigenous issues, I don't like to use the word primitive, but I don't mean that in a societal structure type of way. I just mean it in a literal human evolution, like personal evolution, and but also like humanity's evolution. I think um, we've we've built a world now where it's safer to be the black sheep, so to speak. Like you're not going to die by being the black sheep now,
hmm.
whereas in earlier times, like that might be a survival thing. So I don't know. I think might be this like innate mechanism within us that we have to overcome, or I don't know if overcome is the right word. We just have to like develop through it, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. Um, Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's something that I explore, obviously in my thoughts, but
Sure.
and then even then, like you said, what defines an NPC? Maybe I never was. Maybe it was just this, my parents were really social, so I thought it was just normal to want to fit in sort of thing, and rather than to follow your own path. But at some point I was like, that's not as healthy. You know what I mean? Mentally, it's not the the path that makes me feel alive, so to speak, right?
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I don't, I don't know that I was an NPC, but I certainly empathize with them because of my experience in, wanting to fit in, so to speak. I think that I do. If I was to, I don't know, I think we all define these terms collectively. But
Sure.
from my perspective, I would say that that's kind of the defining feature of an NPC is that their main goal is to fit in.
I've sort of developed my own little tests along the way. That moment from The Waking Life where he asks her like, "What it's like to be a character in my dream," and she stares at him blankly and can't answer. You know, um, before I even got into these ideas of like Gnostic simulation theory, um, I would try to walk people through things that seem very logically obvious, and realizing no amount of evidence, no amount of erudition or argumentation was going to convert them.
Mm.
And at some point, I would get into, I would try to discuss these matters for hours with individuals, and we just go round and round and round. And I was just like, at some point, I got so exhausted, I just started suspending the conversation and looking them directly in the eyes. And I said, "Are you a person?" And that's a very insulting thing to do, right? Because it implies that
You might not be.
you might not be. And it was incredibly surprising to me how many people struggled to answer that question. It was a lot of, I don't know, or they would try to turn it around and be like, I don't know, are you a person? Like, how would you just vindicate yourself as a person? Stuff like that. It was way more common for people to struggle to answer that question than I anticipated. So that was I would kind of pull that out when I started to suspect that I wasn't dealing with.
Did anybody say how would you define person?
I'm sure that came up. Like it's kind of like this immediate datum of consciousness, right? Like I can't really anticipate how the things that I am feeling could be um, any more real than they actually are. Like I don't think there's really anyone who would question about whether or not, like, whether or not I'm one of them. But that sounds incredibly narcissistic. Some of the other questions that I would ask individuals would be, like, do you have the internal monologue? Can you rotate the photorealistic apple? Like, et cetera, et cetera. And again, it's very surprising how many individuals lack that internal monologue. The answers have been less surprising with the rotating of the photorealistic apple. But, there's something like, 30, 40, 60% of the population, I think in some of these studies have come across as not having that internal monologue. Do you have an internal monologue?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's an entire book, part of the Toltec package, so to speak. One of the books is called The Voice of Knowledge, and that's about, the voice that speaks to us in our own language.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish I could turn it off. I wish I didn't have it, but it's quite present with me at all times.
Yeah, The Voice of Knowledge, a good book for sure. Yeah, I have got a few more like kind of rapid fire ones, but that was the bulk of what I wanted to talk about there. What would you say is the proper relationship between intuition and reason?
Gosh, man. I mean, this is like, I gotta like go back and dig into my Kant. Intuition and reason. Gosh, what do you mean by intuition? You mean like,
well, I believe that's
like perceiving reality, or like hunches? What do you mean by intuition?
I think actually ties in perfectly with what we were just talking about. I think intuition is the knowledge that we have. The Toltecs would call it silent knowledge. So it's knowledge, it's what we know through feeling it. We just know it. We don't have the ability to even explain it. It's not, it's not that it can be explained. It's just, we know without
I've come to, if that's what you mean by intuition, I've come to trust it a lot more towards where I am on this journey. I don't think it's something that I gave a lot of primacy to when I was doing my formal education prior to my awakening in 2016. I would perhaps allow one's intuition to generate thought experiments, or to chase a hunch or something like that, but I wouldn't really allow it to inform my worldview, because you can have so many wild intuitions, and the question is, what are they ultimately founded upon? As time has gone on, I have learned to accept that inner knowing, those intuitive feelings. I'm privileging them more now, and I don't need to have a rigorous philosophical system in place justifying the privileging of those intuitive feelings, like I may have needed in the past. I think for me in the past, it was about, you had to build the rational framework, and then find a home for those intuitive feelings, and whether or not they lined up to that rational framework or not allowed you to sift through them. Now I give the priority to those intuitive feelings, although I don't have the rational framework like I would like. I don't have a full commitment to a type of simulation theory. I don't have a full commitment to a type of dream analysis that we may be living in. I do not have a full schemata of all the different types of conscious beings that could be here. But I have things that resonate within me that I more or less feel are true, but I have trouble in these contexts justifying them. And that might be why I tend to privilege doing more like lectures and things like that on the internet, because it keeps me out of trouble. I like to stay on script a little bit more, because I don't have the best evidence for a lot of the things that I intuit to be true, not like I would like. And I'm not trying to put myself out there as some sort of teacher of those particular things. I am guided by them to investigate and to spur on the pursuit of knowledge through passion, a passionate discovery of the materials that I'm working on. But there's a lot for me that I have not systematized. I had a much more systematic way of understanding the world prior to 2016. A lot of those concepts were exploded.
Gotcha. Um, if I was to be quick with it, I think the fact that you said you're looking at those intuitive knowings more on a more primary basis now.
Mm.
I feel the same way. And
Like with my waking life anecdote the other day, when I did the Bible study, judge not lest you be judged, and then it showed up immediately in the waking life. I was like, okay, this is confirmation. Can I prove this?
right,
Absolutely not.
right, right. But it's still, life will teach you to follow that.
Yeah. But that's it's a pretty it seems like a pretty irrational way to go about building your belief system, because you had some sort of synchronicity with a film you watched, a Bible study you did 2 hours earlier. And I have these like 3 or 4 times a day. So
Yeah, but
who knows where they're even coming from? A lot of people tell me that these synchronicities are demonic, that these are demons playing tricks on me. And so because I'm not effectively vetting them, I'm being led towards error, which could totally be true. Although I've asked God a million different times that if these are deceiving spirits, to remove them from me, and he just keeps giving them to me more and more.
Right, so that tells you something there, in my opinion. So to get away from the intellectually deep stuff and to finish off with a few lighter topics, do you think monogamy is natural?
Do I think monogamy is natural?
It's a more social question than
for
intellectual
humans,
question. I don't know about light. Yeah, for humanity. Yeah,
for humanity,
for humans. Yeah.
Jeez, gosh, man, I should have done some homework here. Do I think it is natural? What, for men or for women? I mean, is one size fits all here?
So
I don't have a strong opinion about this. I think I think that a monogamous and loving relationship is ideal.
Okay.
But but there are other instincts that may drive someone towards polygamy or something like that. I think that would be
I mean,
I think that's unsustainable in a lot of ways.
Relatively new in the human story.
I don't know. It depends on the origin story that we're given. Is it the out of Africa hypothesis? Is it out of Asia? Is it Adam? If it's Adam and Eve, monogamy was in place from the very beginning.
True. Yeah. No, the reason I asked that question, there is a book called Sex at Dawn by Christopher Ryan, which has gained some notoriety over the last several years. And it does discuss, from an anthropological, biological, and sociological perspective, whether or not monogamy is natural. He doesn't make any moral judgment on it. He's kind of uses the analogy. I don't know if it's a super accurate analogy, but I see where he's going with it. He's basically saying, monogamy might be the best moral choice, but it's just like a vegetarian, like bacon's still going to smell good sort of thing.
Right. I mean, it all depends on the nature of the environment that we're in as well. Like, let's say monogamy is not the natural setting that we are built on. The argument I would make is that it's better for human flourishing than to be constantly enslaved to your passions and chasing the opposite sex or the same sex or whatever you're into. I can say this from experience. I played the field for a while when I was a younger guy. So what is naturally occurring and what ought to be the case are two different things. This is like a normative issue. This is like an ethic. I would say that monogamy is the more high IQ state of things. That's how I would go. But not everyone would agree with me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like the situation you talked about earlier in terms of like food appetites, right? Like, is it best to be vegan or vegetarian or an omnivore or a carnivore or things like that? you may have a proclivity to being a carnivore or an omnivore or something like that, but it may be objectively true, scientifically speaking, to be pescatarian or to be vegetarian, and you have to sublimate those desires that you may have for those other things for greater health.
Right. No, I think the deeper question here is natural. Is what's natural? What's best?
No, well, yeah, clear. And if we're in some sort of Gnostic matrix, then clearly it's not.
Right.
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 So if we're going to start out with that assumption that we are in some sort of demiurgic aborted creation, then we are imitating what comes naturally is not necessarily what we ought to do. What one ought to do is, that's a whole other conversation in regards to ethics and social and sexual ethics and this and that.
Yeah.
Diets and things of that nature.
No, for sure. For sure.
I don't pay attention to any of these identity politics conversations, so I don't know if I've like said enough. If I've said something here that'll get me canceled.
I haven't. I'm not a big identity politics one either, and yeah, I don't know, but I'm already canceled as far as I'm concerned. I started out canceled from the jump. Yeah. What is your take on this? Is switching gears a little bit. What's your take on the current global and domestic economic situation? What are your thoughts on central banking, crypto, and have you heard the idea or philosophy of gift economy? And have you heard of the book Sacred Economics by Charles Eisenstein?
Just that you told me about it. Yeah, I don't. It's just a game, man. It's just. I don't really have any strong opinions about it. I'm not really. I don't really pay attention to global financial markets or anything like that.
Well, I agree that it's all a game, and that's. I mean, that gets more at the central banking part of my question. Because of central banking, it is all a game.
It's just. I just think there are layers to reality. If you mentioned football earlier, I too am a massive football fan. All right. Like where I did my PhD, has been the past 10 years especially the past 6 or 7 years has been one of the collegiate powerhouses in football. They may very well win the national championship this year. It's the University of Georgia. And I'm a big Commanders fan, and I've fallen in love with this Jaden Daniels quarterback and loving that we're going to be in the playoffs as well. Saying all that, I don't think it's just a game. It's not. There was a time where I had kind of a religious attachment to all these things, like you were talking about earlier, how we have this kind of Rain Man understanding of all the different positions and their stats and outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. I think the vast majority of those players are giving it their all, and it's real to them. But there are forces that are bigger than them that are shaping the outcomes. And so,
most popular podcast is with a guy named Brian Toohey. He wrote a book called The Fix Is In. It's about that.
So, and I don't necessarily think it's people that are fixing it. I think it's fate.
I think there's an aspect to that. Yeah,
there's a lot of mystical things that happen in sports, especially being a Commanders fan. You see the synchronicities between the Joe Theismann injury and the Alex Smith injury, and them playing the same team and breaking it in the same way on the same yard line and the same scenarios. It's too big for people to script. I think it's even if there is that level of fixing going on, there's a simulation aspect to it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
So
I 100% agree with that, actually.
So it's just a game. I try not to. I guess I'd feel more comfortable telling you what I think.
But I will tell you this: poor people don't think it's just a game.
What's that?
Poor people don't feel like it's just a game, though.
I think there's a lot of poor people who understand it's entertainment.
And I'm not talking about football, though. I'm talking about the economy.
Oh yeah, I think
so. The analogy you're making, I see where you're going with it on one level, but it's just like you said, the players, they're playing hard.
I
But
think
and
some of
that's
them
kind of
also know. I think some of them also know that it's not real in the fullest sense too.
right.
You
Yeah.
know, I think some of them know that there are forces, and I'm not trying to talk about like conspiracies. Like I'm talking about like
Like
there
from
are.
the collective unconscious
Yeah, I'm talking about like
or
there's something
archons.
spiritual. I think there's
Right.
all sorts of spiritual stuff flowing through the games, and I think there's all sorts of spiritual stuff flowing through every aspect of reality, even squirrels. And sometimes they coincide. Like these animals will run out onto the field, and
Cats and
and
stuff.
so,
Yeah.
and it kind of reveal if you're paying close enough attention, you kind of tell who's going to win as a result of these nature incurring into these games.
That's interesting.
So you asked me about the where things are going from a global financial perspective. Like,
Yeah, do
are
you
we going to
think
get
crypto's going
Nasara
to
and
take over?
Jasara? Like, is the QAnon stuff going to be true? And is like Trump Saint Germain reincarnated or something? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
What about crypto?
I'm not invested in it. I I to be I'm so where my mindset is right now. Like I've got a stack of books that I'm trying to do in order to understand reality, and perhaps the financial markets will help me with the metaphysics. I haven't really thought about that too much, but um, for me, like clouding my mind with financial concerns takes away from my ability to understand, like to contemplate God. So, you know, I guess I
You
need.
don't think God has anything to do with people's wealth status?
Sure. I mean, I think you can raise people up and bring them down, but I mean, ultimately, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. I don't really think. I don't think mammon is something that is of concern to God, really.
Well, that's fair. Um,
You know,
and then
it's easier. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get into heaven. Yeah, that's kind of my perspective.
oof. Yeah, man, it's tough. You actually already answered this a little bit because you said you had a rock star dream, but I did put as this last bullet point just to end on the lightest note possible. I find music to be the highest form of art due to its integral relationship with life itself, its vibration passing through matter. Although I'm not a musician, my appreciation for music is beyond words. How do you feel about the art form that is music?
Well, I used to think it gave all sense of meaning to my life. I think it's an interesting question about it being the highest art form. I think philosophers like Hegel and Schopenhauer and other people like that are interesting to read on this perspective if one wants to get into aesthetic theory and the hierarchy of the different forms of art. It could be, I guess, what you would call like the purest concretization of spirit. I think it's an interesting question about whether or not it is the highest art form. If that's what the art truly exists as, is like that we're giving. It has to have an immaterial medium in order for the fullest expression of spirit to come through it. If that's what makes great art, I think you can make the case that music is the highest art form for that reason. But I will say, I don't really find music that interesting anymore after devoting decades of my life to it and playing drums and producing and things like that. Many of the things after my awakening, many of the things that I found beautiful in music are no longer beautiful to me. And it again, even if it is the highest art form, I think I'm prepared to contemplate whether or not it is an obstacle for our true purpose, which is,
In
the
what
pursuit of
way?
truth.
So,
Well, I
like,
can say
it distracts us from the pursuit of truth.
yeah, it creates an aesthetic intoxication.
Yeah,
It,
yeah.
it
I mean,
encourages.
I'm all good with that thought experiment, but ultimately, I truly believe our purpose is to enjoy life. Like that is. I mean, it sounds in some ways, destructive or yeah, pleasure seeking, right? But I mean it in a more holistic and fulfilling and in non-destructive way, like in a way that is able to sustain itself in a self-sustaining manner. So I believe that our purpose is to enjoy life in a way, in a sustaining manner, basically in a way that we can sustain the fun. A lot of people think of as fun is destructive, and I'm not talking about that type of fun. I'm talking about the type of fun that builds upon itself.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think, I'm not saying that music is dangerous in some way, but, and I have a very unique relationship to it. And perhaps this is just sour grapes. You know, I had a couple opportunities to make it big in the music industry, and it didn't happen for a variety of different reasons. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like it was holding me back. I think the path that I'm on, and I'm not saying this is the path that everybody needs to be on. I think it was holding me back. I don't feel like I was realizing my true intellectual potential because I was too preoccupied with music.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm not. I've never pursued it in that manner as to perform or be a musician. I'm just an enjoyer of it. So I guess my perspective is limited to that. But I just
different strokes for different folks. You know,
I
mean,
enjoy it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'm not so ascetic that I think like music needs to go away. It's just, and perhaps I did so much of it, I just got sick of it. You know.
Yeah. Yep. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, Dr. Luke. Was there anything you wanted to add?
I think we're good, man.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on. When you have this formal presentation 100% ready, no rush at all. Like don't, try to finish up between now and any specific date. But when you're comfortably done, let me know and we can host a more formal presentation.
For sure. For sure. I think I'm going to do I've got an interview that I'm doing. If anyone's interested, I'm interviewing the author of this book right here. This is a great book, To Touch the Face of God by Kendrick Oliver. This is like about how religion intermixed with the space age, especially the Apollo program. Fascinating book. I'm going to be interviewing the author of this on Tuesday. And then I don't know, maybe I'd like to look at a poem or something like that. And then I've got like an 8-part series, which I mentioned earlier, where I'm going to be looking at Fraser's The Golden Bow.
I did have one last question.
Sure.
I think you did answer affirmatively, but have you seen Kubrick's Odyssey?
I think I have. I think, is this is this?
So there's two of them. I forget which one is which, but one of them goes into The Shining about the space. How it is basically Kubrick telling through code and symbols how he directed the film that was the moon landing.
Right.
And then the other Kubrick's Odyssey dives more into Space Odyssey 2001. One of them also covers.
Is this Jay Widener's? Is this the Jay Widener?
Widener. Yep. And also touches on Eyes Wide Shut a little bit, but the one that intrigued, well, the Space Odyssey part definitely intrigued me too. But The Shining, the layers of symbolism and that was just mind-boggling. And the reason I brought it up is it's definitely something that you would find interesting.
Oh yeah. Well, I think the thing is you can endlessly analyze all the symbology and all the Kubrick stuff, and that's cool. That's a lot of fun. I continue to do it. As it became painfully clear throughout this entire conversation, I'm lacking a metaphysical worldview that is complete. And so for me, the study of Jung, I think this puzzle language is all running through Jung, and it's running through a larger alchemical tradition. And I think I won't be satisfied until I have a great handle on that. So I could riff for days on Kubrick films. I mean, I really don't know anyone I know a few people, not in my daily life, I know a few people who might be as autistic about it as I am, but ultimately it has to give way to theory, a structure, or maybe it doesn't. Otherwise, then it's just constantly like, it's like a game like that you're playing. And
I would argue for that. I do think there's a more dynamic aspect to it. It's kind of like, it's kind of like musical chairs, but without a chair going away. It's just like a dance, you know?
Yep. There's only so much gematria and like conspiracy theory and stuff like that you can get into. Like the conspiracy theory is something you kind of have to go through. But ultimately
that term is just, to me at this point, that's just a term to dissuade people away from taboo topics. Sure. I mean, the definition of conspiracy, literally, me and you are conspiring right now. Like, get the fuck out of here with conspiracy theory. Like, it's a way to dissuade people from searching for truth, really, is what that is.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't, that's an interesting question. I mean, I just like theories. I like ideas, you know, and whether or not the idea is mainstream or fringe doesn't really matter to me. Like, I'm anti-intellectual no-go zones. So,
do you think that ideas have a ethereal life that is independent of other ideas?
Well, like, this gets back into this gets into the archetypes,
right? You know? No, 100%.
Like, yeah, and what sort of substance they're made of. I've yet to determine what that is, but you know, I've got to do another close reading of Plato to get this straight.
Well, I think they are alive. Yeah, and that's why it's kind of a dynamic relationship.
Well, you know what Jung said they were. If you really dig into Jung, what he said the archetypes were, he said they were gods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is Toltec's. This again maps right onto Toltec worldview. Depending on culture, depending on where you're talking about and what point in history, they've been called gods, demons, angels. They've had all sorts of names, but they continue to pop up.
Right, and when an archetype does pop up and you're exhibiting it, I think it's worth considering whether or not that's a form of demonic possession. Like that's if you are the magician, like you've been possessed by the archetype.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is where I think the term you used was amalgamation. I think that a lot of people I think most people are some sort of amalgamation of all of these archetypes. I don't know that you can really assign one to any one person that I've ever known. Maybe in any given moment they're embodying this archetype, but then the next moment they could be embodying another archetype.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, again, wonderful discussion. I'm gonna let you go this time, but yeah, we'll definitely have to do it again, and maybe in a more formal way.
I'll be in touch. I'll let you know when I have something together.
All right, sounds great, dude. Have a great night.
You too.
I got that. Yeah, heard them call me conscious. I ain't think about it honestly. My thoughts too deep to process, so I do this all unconsciously. Finally feeling God bless. Got 'em woke up dropping prophecy. Don't take it out of context. Just before, I swear they always sleep. Now they catch the message, yeah. Bet that every song is deep. It's levels in each concept. What I conjure's never mono theme. I'm trying to lead this flock for the cause, not the following. People upon a partner, and I wonder why they drawn to me. Once upon a time, I thought to follow up a dream. Draw life about these lines, nothing twice about these schemes, and like thrice about these insights. What I write is like a blueprint for you to comprehend life. That's light, I reckon, make you shine. Never dim it down, even if you live surrounded where everybody vision clouded. Remember, staying down ain't quite as good as getting out. It said, remember, staying down ain't quite as, ay. If you believe, yeah. Many doubted it was hard for them to think. Somehow I'm finally getting out of that's it. Usually, yeah, they vision clouded, but as you can see by now, we finally getting out there, writing truth, spreading love. Tell me how you feel about it. Got this music from above, this how I know I'm getting out there, writing truth, spreading love. Tell me how you feel about it. Got this music from above, this how I